St. Helena High School had stood for over a century, its walls steeped in history and silent whispers of the past. The grand, towering structure loomed over the students like a watchful guardian, its stone facade weathered by time. Stories had been passed down from one generation to the next, of ghosts that roamed the halls, of shadows flickering in the dead of night, of eerie whispers heard when no one else was around. Most dismissed them as mere legends, nothing more than the overactive imaginations of students eager to add excitement to their mundane school lives. But some stories refused to fade. Dina had always been a skeptic. As the top student in her class, she prided herself on her logical mind, her refusal to believe in things without proof. But even she couldn't deny the unsettling feeling she got whenever she walked past room 404, a classroom that had been sealed shut for as long as she could remember. The wooden door was covered in scratches, deep grooves clawed into the surface as if something had desperately tried to escape. A rusted chain wrapped around the handles, held together by an old unmarked padlock. No one spoke of room 404. Teachers ignored it. The janitors never cleaned near it. Even the bravest students never dared to joke about it. But Dina had always been curious, and on that particular evening, when the school was nearly empty and the sun had dipped below the horizon, she found herself standing in front of the forbidden door, heart pounding against her ribs. It had started as a simple dare. Her best friend Ryan had smirked at her that afternoon, challenging her to take a peek inside. "Since you're so smart," he'd teased, "why don't you prove once and for all that ghosts don't exist?" She shouldn't have agreed. Now, as she reached out to touch the cold, rusted chain, the air around her seemed to grow heavier, pressing down on her like an invisible weight. The dim corridor lights flickered, casting strange shadows that danced along the walls. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. Then the lock clicked open. Dina froze. She hadn't even touched it yet. The chain slipped away, crashing to the floor with a deafening clang. The silence that followed was suffocating. Her breath hitched as she wrapped her fingers around the doorknob, the metal icy against her skin. Slowly, she pushed the door open. The scent of dust and decay filled her nostrils. Inside the room was eerily pristine. Desks stood neatly in rows, untouched by time. The blackboard was clean, as if waiting for a teacher to write on it. But the strangest thing was the air. It was too still, too quiet, as if the very room held its breath. A chill ran down her spine. She had expected broken furniture, cobwebs, signs of abandonment. Instead, it looked as though class had been dismissed only moments ago. And then she saw them. Desks occupied by shadowy figures, their faces blurred, their heads slowly turning toward her. A whisper echoed through the room. "You shouldn't be here." Dina's scream caught in her throat as the whisper rippled through the air, each syllable brushing against her skin like an icy breeze. The figures remained seated, their hollow, featureless faces turned toward her. They did not move, did not blink. The silence was suffocating, a void that swallowed every sound, including her own breath. Her legs trembled, but she couldn't move. She couldn't look away from the shadowed forms that sat in perfect rows, facing the empty teacher's desk at the front of the room. The chalk on the board suddenly twitched, as if an invisible hand had taken hold of it. Then slowly, deliberately, it began to write. "Join us." The word sent a violent shudder through her body. The lights above flickered wildly, casting sharp, shifting shadows across the room. The air grew colder, biting against her skin like frozen needles. The figures in the seats did not move, but somehow she could feel their eyes on her, unseen yet piercing through her very soul. She needed to get out. Dina took a shaky step back, her heart hammering against her ribs. The floorboards creaked beneath her weight, and in that instant, the figures began to stir. One by one, they turned. Their limbs moved with unnatural slowness, like marionettes controlled by invisible strings. Their heads tilted, their bodies twisting toward her. A chorus of whispers filled the room, overlapping in a discordant symphony. "Stay, learn, become one of us." Her breath came in shallow gasps. The walls seemed to close in around her, the air thick with something unseen yet suffocating. She spun on her heels, reaching for the door, but it slammed shut before she could touch it. Dina's scream finally broke free. She pounded on the wood, twisting the handle with all her strength, but it wouldn't budge. Behind her, the whispers grew louder, closer. The air pulsed with an eerie energy, and she could feel them, right behind her. Then a hand, cold as death, grasped her shoulder. Darkness swallowed everything. The next morning, the students of St. Helena High whispered among themselves, Dina never came home. Her books were found scattered in the hallway outside room 404, but there was no trace of her. The janitors refused to speak about it. The teachers dismissed her disappearance as a runaway case, but the students knew better. No one ever spoke of room 404, and no one dared to open it again. St. Augustine High School had always been surrounded by eerie rumors, but no one ever took them seriously. That is, until Mia, a quiet girl from Class 3B, disappeared without a trace one rainy evening. The school was old. Its wooden floors creaked with every step, and the hallways were lined with faded trophies and peeling posters. The worst part was the third floor, where the abandoned music room stood. Students claimed they sometimes heard a piano playing at night, even though the keys were covered in dust. One evening, after staying late for student council duties, Ryan and his friends, Ella, Jason, and Nina, decided to investigate the music room. The storm outside had cut the power, leaving only the dim glow of the emergency lights flickering along the corridor. I heard Mia was last seen near here, Jason whispered as they approached the music room. Ella shivered. Maybe she just ran away. I mean, people don't just vanish. Ryan tried to turn the knob, but the door was locked. Help me push it open, he said. Jason joined him, and with a loud crack, the door gave way. Inside, the room smelled of dust and something foul. The grand piano sat in the center, its lid slightly open. A single chair faced it, but the most unsettling sight was the blackboard. On it, in what looked like dried blood, were the words, "Play the last note." Nina backed away. I don't like this. We should go. But Ryan, ever the skeptic, walked toward the piano. It's just a stupid prank, he muttered, pressing a random key. The sound was sharp, echoing unnaturally through the empty halls. Then, the chair moved. Ella screamed as the old wooden chair scraped against the floor, spinning as if someone unseen had just risen from it. And then they heard it, a soft giggle. Jason pointed at the blackboard, his face pale. The words had changed. Now it read, "One of you stays." The lights flickered violently. Shadows stretched unnaturally and the air grew freezing. The door behind them slammed shut. Then, the piano played. It wasn't Ryan, it wasn't any of them. The keys moved on their own, playing a slow, haunting melody. And then Mia's voice whispered from the darkness, "Help me." A hand shot out from beneath the piano, grabbing Ryan's ankle. He screamed, kicking wildly, but the grip was ice-cold and unrelenting. "Run!" Jason shouted, yanking the door open. They bolted down the hallway, the sound of the piano following them, growing louder and louder until... Ding! The last bell rang. They turned back. The music room door was gone. Not just closed. Gone. A blank wall stood where it had been. No door, no signs it had ever existed, and Ryan was nowhere to be seen. The next morning, St. Augustine High continued as usual. No one mentioned Ryan. No teachers called his name. It was as if he had never existed. But that night, when Ella checked the class roster, her blood ran cold. Ryan's name had been replaced. Mia Thompson, present, and from the end of the hallway a piano played. It was almost 7 p.m. when Liana finally left the student council room. She sighed, stretching her stiff shoulders after spending hours organizing event proposals. The school building was eerily quiet, with most students already gone. Only a few dim lights flickered in the hallway, casting long shadows. She glanced at her phone. 6:57 p.m. Crap, I stayed too long, she muttered. The school gate closed at 7:15 p.m. and she didn't want to be locked inside again. Hurriedly, she walked down the hallway, her shoes clicking against the cold tile floor. As she passed the old music room, she heard it, a faint melody drifting through the air. She stopped. The music was soft, almost like a lullaby played on a piano, but that was impossible. The music room had been abandoned for years, ever since a student mysteriously disappeared inside. Liana swallowed hard. Maybe a teacher was still here, but why would anyone play music in an abandoned room? Curiosity gnawed at her. Ignoring the chill creeping down her spine, she slowly approached the door. The glass panel was too dusty to see inside. Heart pounding, she reached for the handle. Creak, the door opened on its own. Inside, the grand piano sat in the center, its black surface gleaming under the dim light. The air smelled of dust and something else, something rotten. Liana's breath hitched when she saw the keys moving. They pressed down, playing the melody on their own. Her body froze. This wasn't right. She took a step back. Bang, the door slammed shut behind her. The melody grew louder, twisting into a discordant screeching tune. The air turned icy. Liana spun around, fumbling for the handle. It wouldn't budge. Then she heard it. A whisper. Right behind her ear. Stay with me. Liana screamed, turning around, only to see a figure sitting at the piano. A girl, dressed in an old-school uniform, her face obscured by long black hair. Her fingers danced over the keys, playing the eerie tune. The girl lifted her head and Liana's blood ran cold. Her eyes were hollow. Dark voids stared back at her, endless and empty. Liana stumbled backward, slamming against the door. Who are you?" she choked out. The girl only tilted her head. Then, in a slow, unnatural movement, she smiled, and then she vanished. The piano stopped playing. Silence. The door behind Liana creaked open. Without thinking, she bolted out, running down the hallway as fast as she could. She didn't stop until she reached the gate, gasping for breath. The security guard stared at her. "You okay?" Liana nodded quickly. "Did you hear that, the piano?" The guard frowned. "Piano?" He shook his head. "That room's been locked for years." Liana turned back, her heart still racing. The hallway was dark, empty. The music room door was shut, dusty, untouched, as if no one had entered in ages. And yet in the stillness she swore she heard it again. That whisper. "Stay with me."